Hello, everybody. Welcome into Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today is Thursday, December 12th. We have a big show for you. We're going to kick it off with a preview of the Thursday night football game that kicks off in just about 10 minutes. A massive game for playoff seeding, not just in the NFC West, but in the wild card as well. We'll also talk about a potential rookie in the MLB, Roki Sasaki, coming out of Japan. He's going to be a phenom in the MLB. We'll talk about where he might land, as well as some fantasy football advice, who to start, who to sit in the first round of the playoffs, the NBA Cup updates, and a look at where we stand in the NFL playoff race. But before we get into any of that, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Or if you are on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. If you do either of those two things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you'd like to ask, go and throw that in the comments. Throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate everybody so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Thursday, December 12th. But like I was saying, we're going to start off our show with a preview of the game that's about to kick off in just about 10 minutes. This game is huge, not just for the division in the NFC West, in which everyone is so close to each other. You have the 49ers currently at 6-7, only 2 games back of the Seahawks at 8-5. The Rams at 7-6, 1 game back of that. But also for the wild card race, while the Rams are 7-6 and a game back of the Seahawks, they're also 1 game back of the Commanders, who hold that 7th wild card spot right now. The 49ers are not out of it, although they do have the toughest path to the playoffs. This game, whoever wins it, will go a long way towards making or missing the playoffs. But we're going to break down what exactly this matchup has. Again, it is a divisional matchup, which always makes it a little bit extra, a little bit wild, a little bit crazy. It's always how it goes in the NFL, especially in an NFC West that is this close, where all those games just mean a little bit more. Since 2021, since Matthew Stafford came over to the Rams, they are 3-5 against the 49ers. The 49ers generally have been better in that matchup. Now, we saw the Rams win that game last time out. The 49ers have had a very up and down season. Not exactly what you would want to see out of a team that just came back from making the Super Bowl, right? Went to overtime in the Super Bowl. They've been injured. Everything's been going wrong, but they showed signs of life, signs of being that old Super Bowl team last week. They finally got a little bit more than what they were getting out of Brock Purdy in the games past. He explodes. They win 38-13. That defense really steps up, and they absolutely dominate a Bears team that kind of was desperate for a win there. That was one that I had penciled in as a potential upset for the Bears. Turns out it was not even close. So if the Niners can play like that, this is a team that's going to be very dangerous. I think the key for them and what happens when their offense goes, this season it's been surrounding Juwan Jennings. Juwan Jennings is a wide receiver that I am a very big fan of, right? He's a guy that signed a small extension at the beginning of the year amidst the whole Brandon Ayuk saga with the 49ers. He signed a little bit of an extension, just a small one, staying with the team for cheap, but he's been the X factor in these games. We know the issues that they've been having with the running back positions as far as injuries go, right? We saw Christian McCaffrey come back for just a little bit before going on IR. Jordan Mason now on IR. Isaac Guerrero is healthy. He's going to be active, but he's dealing with a little bit of an injury, and I'm not sure how effective he's going to be. Behind him, you've got Patrick Taylor Jr. They signed Israel Abanikanda. This is not a running back room that you're looking at and you're saying, wow, I can't wait for the 49ers to rely on them, because this is a 49ers team that was very run-heavy last season, and they have been very run-heavy in their success, but this offense especially has been going with Juwan Jennings, and he's been up and down all season. He has these games where he just gets open on every single play, and like what happened last week, he scores 2 touchdowns. Ezekiel asks Pollard or Garendo. I'm going Pollard here. We got fantasy football start sits. Little bit of a spoiler for you there. I have Tony Pollard in my starts, and Garendo coming off of that injury. I'm not sure how much they're going to use him today, so I'm going with Pollard on this one. But getting back into this Thursday night football game, you have a 49ers team again that kind of goes as Jawan Jennings does. This is a Rams defense that's very young, but they've been playing great football. That's something that really has impressed me about this Rams team. They've dealt with their fair share of injuries. There's no doubt about that, right? They've had their injuries, especially offensively, but the young guys on that defensive line and in the secondary have really, really stepped up. So it's not going to be an easy game for the 49ers either. Now, when we take a look at the Rams, obviously, we can't just gloss over the fact that they just dropped 44 points on the Bills, a very good Buffalo Bills team, a Bills team that generally the way to beat them has been with the run, but instead they beat them through the air, which is something that we hadn't really seen all season. Matthew Stafford put up his best game of the year, but he's been just kind of okay. Him and Brock Purdy both have very comparable stats. Now, there's some excuses for both of them because of injuries. They're both at about 3,000 yards, about 15 touchdowns, and 7 or 8 interceptions. So they have very comparable season stats. But when you look at this Rams team, when they have Puka and Cooper Kupp together on the same field, first of all, Puka Nacua, arguably a top 5 receiver in the league right now with what he's been able to put up in his limited action this season. He's already approaching 1,000 yards on just 54 catches. He's over 800 already. He's a guy that his production is insane. He makes at least one catch that shouldn't be made every single week. And Cooper Kupp, a guy that just 3 years ago won the wide receiver triple crown and an offensive player of the year, he's a really good number 2 to have. It's not like he's fallen off that hard. He's still a really reliable guy and a guy that you want, and it's super tough to cover both of them. Now, that 49ers defensive line is going to be a problem for the offensive line of the Rams. And that's where the big matchup is going to be. Can this Rams offensive line that's getting healthy, getting together, starting to figure it out, deal with a 49ers defensive line that's going to be flying at them all night long? Nick Bosa is active tonight. I think that's a huge get for the Niners, and I think honestly that's something that might change the game in the favor of the 49ers tonight. There's a lot of factors that you have to take into account in this one, but I do think this is a game that the Niners keep their momentum up and they find a way to win. This is a huge one for the playoff race, not just them, but the 49ers have a tough schedule coming up. If they want to stay in it, they kind of need this one more than the Rams, who have a softer schedule after this one. So maybe the Niners come out with a little bit more, especially after losing the first one to these Rams. I'm taking the 49ers to win this game on the road. On the road. 28-24. But let me know what you think. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this game. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we turn our attention to the MLB real quick. It is a massive, massive story. Roki Sasaki, coming out of the Japanese league, has been posted during the winter meetings. He is going to be a special kind of player at the MLB level. We're going to talk about where he might end up and what teams are interested in him. That's coming up next here on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign,
Welcome back to Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today is Thursday, December 12th. If you were just tuning in, we just finished going over the Rams versus 49ers game that is set to kick off any minute now. In this segment, we turn our attention to baseball real quick. A massive international free agent has just been posted, that of 23-year-old pitcher out of Japan, Roki Sasaki. He is going to be incredible at the MLB level. We're going to talk about where he might end up and why I think he's going to go there. But before we get into that, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Or if you are on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. If you do either of those two things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comments. Throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. Ezekiel asks, again, about Pollard or Guerrero. I know Pollard has a little bit of that injury, but I'm taking that matchup of his when he takes on a much more a much better or much worse run defense, I should say. I just don't know exactly how good Guerrendo's going to be tonight. I just don't trust him with that injury sustained, and such a short rest period really is what scares me. But like I was saying, we are going to get into some baseball talk here. Roki Sasaki. He is going to be a phenomenal player here. He has a special pitch arsenal. If you were watching the World Baseball Classic in 2023, he was that pitcher that came out from Japan that everyone was raving about, went out and dominated in some of their biggest games, getting them all the way to the final and eventually being a part of that team that ended up winning it all. Now, the big story of that game was Shohei Ohtani striking out Mike Trout 3 pitches right down the middle to end the game. But this is a huge deal for Major League Baseball. He's coming out a year early. Generally, the process is these guys that come over from the international leagues, especially Japanese leagues, wait a little bit longer. That's why you have guys like Yoshi Yamamoto coming into the league at 25 years old. He's coming into the league at 23, and the reason why a lot of them wait a little bit longer is because then they're eligible to get the big money contracts, those $400 million contracts that a guy like Yoshi Yamamoto got last offseason. He's coming in, Sasaki, coming in a year early at age 23. He's only eligible to get about $5 to $7.5 million. So that is a huge discount for any team that is getting him, and it also puts a lot more MLB teams in the running. You've seen just about every single MLB team say they're interested, all the way down from the Colorado Rockies, a team that famously is pretty cheap. They're not a team that's going to go out and spend all that money, but for a guy that's going to be relatively cheap for how special he's going to be, everyone in the MLB should be and is seemingly interested. Now, of course, you can go from the Rockies all the way up to the Dodgers, who could offer him a lot of money. They have ties, obviously, to Shohei Ohtani and Yoshi Yamamoto, both signed last offseason. They played together on that 2023 World Baseball Classic team, and that's a huge motivator. Obviously, when you're moving to new places, it helps to know people. It's something that would absolutely help Sasaki as he is trying to adjust, and something that his agent has talked about a lot. He had some trouble with mental health when he was dealing with the Japanese media, so he was saying, the agent brought up an interesting point, that maybe a smaller market team, a small to mid-sized market, somewhere that, it wouldn't be the center of attention like in LA, but that's not to say that he won't go to LA. I assume the agent came out and said they're going to do this in a bunch of waves, right? First wave, they're going to go into a central location of the US and they're going to meet, and then they're going to start knocking teams off. So again, you obviously have your big name suitors. You have your Dodgers, you have your Yankees, you have your Mets, you have your Padres, these guys that are on the West Coast or big money spenders that always have a chance at these guys. The Dodgers obviously have that Japanese tie, but another team that has a Japanese tie, obviously the first one you think of a lot of times when you think of Japanese players, it's the Seattle Mariners. And that's a team that I want to highlight a little bit here because they are a really good team at developing pitchers, which is what Roki Sasaki obviously is. He's a guy that's coming in with one of the most unique pitching arsenals in the history of baseball. He has a pitch that literally no one in the history of baseball has ever thrown. Nothing like that has ever been seen. The closest pitch that there is to what he throws is Chris Flexen's sinker, right? Chris Flexen, the ace for the Seattle Mariners. The Seattle Mariners also obviously have ties to Japan through Ichiro Suzuki, Yusei Kikuchi. These guys that came over and joined the Mariners, obviously a lot of these teams, because of Ichiro specifically, a lot of these players from Japan have a liking, have kind of a fanhood of this Mariners team. Now, I don't know exactly if Sasaki feels the same way, but you want to look for a Japanese connection. They've have a little base there. That's something that's absolutely there, and they have the staff, they have the guys that are closest to it to develop a guy like Sasaki. So if you're looking at maybe the best fit, I think it probably is the Mariners. Now, that's not a guarantee that he's going to go there. There's obviously a lot of other criteria if he wants to go to a winning team, if he wants to go to a young team. There's lots of different things out there, but a couple other teams that I think could get into that second round, that deep running that of teams trying to get Sasaki. I'm looking at a team like the Orioles, right? They're desperate for a pitcher. Everyone else in the AL East seemingly went out and got their pitchers, right? The Red Sox went out and got Garrett Crochet from the White Sox. The Yankees, they went out and signed Max Fried to a massive contract, and that's not to say that either of those two teams are done. I expect both of them to pursue a guy like Sasaki, but the Orioles, whose biggest problem last season was pitching depth. All of their pitchers went down, and that's what really caused them to fall off at the end. That's a team that I'm looking at, not just for Sasaki, but really any free agent pitcher. I expect them to spend a lot there. But if you're looking at a team that's not really at the same level of competitiveness, but could be there soon, I'm looking at a team like the Washington Nationals. They also are in desperate need of a pitcher. They've got lots of young talent coming up recently. This is a team in the Washington Nationals that called up two of the top three prospects in baseball last season, Dylan Cruz and James Wood. That is a dangerous duo from the batting lineup. They're starting to develop a little bit. They have a Gold Glove center fielder who's also was a rookie last year in Jacob Young. This is a young team, no doubt about it. But this is a team that I think really could be better in the near future. Now, they're not ready like that. They're not ready right away, and if Sasaki wants to go to a place where he wants to win right away, they shouldn't make the finale. But they're also looking for pitching, and if he's looking at a place to go to with a lot of young guys, I think the Nationals are a good spot to go. But really what I think this is going to come down to is if he wants to go to a big market or a small market. And if he wants to go to a smaller market, I think he's going to the Mariners, right? I've heard reports of the Reds trying to make a hard push for him, which I think would be really cool as well, getting him in Cincinnati. The Dodgers obviously still have a shot here. The Padres on the West Coast also still have a shot there. But I'm leaning towards the Mariners on this one. I think it's going to be a huge get for them. The way that they're going to be able to develop him with his pitching plan and his exact set of pitches is going to be better than anybody else in the league, and I think that's the best fit. But let me know what you think. Where do you think Sasaki's going to end up? I would love to hear your thoughts. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, fantasy football advice, right? Fantasy football playoffs kick off this week. We have some huge decisions to make. I've got starts and sits coming up next for you here on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now. Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back to Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today is Thursday, December 12th. If you were just tuning in, we just finished going over where potential landing spots are for superstar pitcher Roki Sasaki out of the Japan League, coming over after being posted just this week at the MLB winter meetings. In this segment, we turn to fantasy football just a little bit. The playoffs start for most leagues this week. Round 1 is here. You have to get the right guys in. We got starts and sits coming up for you, but before we do that, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Or if you are on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. If you do either of those two things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go and throw that in the comments. Throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate everybody so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Thursday, December 12th. But like I was saying, we're going to get into some fantasy football starts and sits here as we get into week 15. The playoffs are beginning. So we went from 3 to 5 on this one at each position: quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end. We're going to start off at the quarterback position. There are a couple of guys that I'm starting just for matchup purposes. Now, I understand they haven't had the greatest performances in the last couple of weeks. Will Levis had a stinker last week, but going up against the Cincinnati defense, I think that's one where he could get right. Now, the Jaguars defense was one where he was supposed to get right as well, but I think this week is going to go better. That secondary is a little bit worse in Cincinnati than it is in Jacksonville, and I just think this is the week that the Titans figure it out just a little bit more. Same thing goes for Kirk Cousins versus the Las Vegas Raiders. And if you have another option, probably lean with him just a little bit. 0 touchdowns, 8 interceptions, but against the Raiders, a team that has been awful defensively, especially in the secondary, he's a guy that I'm starting as far as waiver quarterbacks if you need one this week. He's a guy that I might look at for picking up. Now getting to someone that you're questioning on your bench, I'm looking at a guy like Kyler Murray. Kyler Murray has been not that great. He was a guy that I tabbed as having a breakout season this year. He's been fine, just fine this season. When I'm looking at New England, they've given up at least 20 points to just about every single quarterback that they have played in the last couple of weeks. Kyler Murray should have a huge game against those New England Patriots. Another quarterback that I think is going to have a huge game against bad competition, Jaden Daniels. And I know that defense looked really good against the Saints defense looked really good against the Giants last week. But when we're talking about a team like the Giants, I mean, just about any defense would look good, right? This is a Jaden Daniels that has been incredible since really being healthy from injury. He had a little bit of a down stretch, but overall, he's the number 2 quarterback in fantasy, and I am not sitting him this week for anything. And the last one I'm starting it's a little bit of a risk again, but I'm starting Aaron Rodgers this week against Jacksonville. Aaron Rodgers just came off of his best performance since 2021. I know they ended up losing that game, but he still had a good game overall, and I think it's going to be a very similar sort of game plan this week against Jacksonville than the one they had against Miami. I think he's going to be big, especially without Breece Hall, seemingly. Breece Hall has missed his second straight practice again. He's a guy that I'm targeting in Aaron Rodgers that I think is due for yet another big week, kind of like last week. But the guys I'm sitting Anthony Richardson this week against a very stout Denver defense. We just saw Jameis Winston go off against them, and sure, they are a team that's beatable on that deep pass. But what Anthony Richardson does really well is on the ground. And I think that's something that Denver's going to be able to stop with their linebacking core right there. They're not going to be able to shut him down completely, but Anthony Richardson is a guy I'm avoiding. Someone else I am avoiding as well at that quarterback position. I'm avoiding a guy in Jameis Winston. Jameis Winston versus Kansas City. Again, he just turns the ball over too much for my liking. I know he can explode for 500 yards and 4 touchdowns, but also he's going to throw 3 interceptions in a game, and that's pretty much a guarantee that he's going to throw a couple of bad interceptions, turn the ball over. And because of that, against a very good Kansas City defense, I just don't trust him this week in the playoffs. And an interesting one, Matthew Stafford, coming off of a massive week. He's been better as of late, and I think he'll have an okay game. But if you're looking for a big game, he is a guy that I'm avoiding. Same thing with Jalen Hurts because of their matchup. Jalen Hurts especially has been struggling recently. When you take a look at guys that have been really bad over the last couple of weeks, really since week 10, the passing attack has gotten absolutely nowhere, just throwing for 100 yards. Now, Jalen Hurts can also get you a couple touchdowns on the ground. No doubt about it. But I'm a little worried about his fight with A.J. Brown. I'm a little worried about his performance as of late. And he's a guy that if I have another option, I'm thinking about sitting this week against a really good Pittsburgh Steelers defense. And the last quarterback that I'm sitting this week is Justin Herbert. You saw how bad that was when they didn't have Ladd McConkey. And I'm not 100% sure if he's going to be back this week. They're going up against a Tampa Bay team that has played pretty good defense as of late. Now, Justin Herbert, if they get Ladd McConkey back, I'm starting him. I am. He's a guy that I think could go off and have a huge week, but I'm going off the assumption that McConkey is not coming in this week, and we saw how bad that was, granted against a good Chiefs defense, but still, I don't trust Justin Herbert without his weapons. Getting into the running backs here, we've got 5 running backs that I'm starting, 5 that I'm sitting. Starting one running back that I'm absolutely starting everywhere is Brian Robinson Jr. against the Saints. That Saints run defense is awful. It really is. Brian Robinson Jr. has been able to run all over defenses with his physical run style, and when he gets going, that Washington offense is really, really hard to stop. I'm taking Brian Robinson Jr. as a top 5 running back this week, really. I think he's a guy that could win a couple playoff games for a lot of people. Chuba Hubbard and Rico Dowdle are playing each other, Dallas versus Carolina. Both of them have atrocious run defenses. Rico Dowdle's been really good recently. Chuba is the workhorse back aside from one pretty bad game against Tampa Bay. He's been really good as of late, earning his contract extension that he got. I'm starting both of them this week in that matchup. Already mentioned that I'm starting Tony Pollard. They have a good matchup against Cincinnati. We just saw Rico Dowdle go off against them. We've seen a bunch of running backs that probably wouldn't have done what they did against any other team have a huge game against Cincinnati. I think Cincinnati's defense has too many holes in it, and I think he's going to have a huge day against the Bengals. We also saw him catch a lot of balls out of the backfield in the last couple weeks. He's a guy that I think could be really dangerous through the air this week as well. And the last running back I'm starting this week is James Conner versus New England. He's a guy that's just going to destroy that defense. He's going to be more physical than them. If he doesn't get into the end zone through the ground, he's got that screen game that's been super effective for them. I think this is a game where the Cardinals offense really explodes, so I'm getting all my shares in the Cardinals offense in my lineup this week. James Conner is a guy that I really do love all season, but especially this week against the Patriots. Couple guys I'm sitting. I'm sitting both of the Browns running backs against Kansas City. Really, any running back against Kansas City, if they're not a lock in your lineup, if they're not a Saquon Barkley, if they're not a Derrick Henry, I am sitting them regardless, right? That run defense that Kansas City has is elite. It's probably the best in all of football for my money. Nick Chubb has not been the greatest since coming back from injury. Jerome Ford's been 50-50 with the carries. I'm sitting both of them this week. I'm not touching them, taking them off of my bench. At number 3, I'm not sitting Alexander Madison or Sincere McCormick. First of all, I'm not starting Alexander Madison because I'm pretty sure Sincere McCormick has taken over that backfield, even if Alexander Madison is back. But that Raider offense, even when they have a lead back, you saw what Amir Abdullah was able to do against a favorable matchup. He's not a real runner. Sincere McCormick's a guy that I like, but he's not a guy that I'm putting into playoff lineups very happily. I'm not starting Jaleel McLaughlin this week. I know it's a great matchup, and he's been kind of that lead back for the Broncos just about the last few weeks. But I feel like this is a Jamal Williams game, right? This is a game where we see Williams really take over the backfield with his physical run style. I think that's the kind of game that we're going to get against a rough Indianapolis run defense. He might find the end zone a couple times. That's the guy that I'm starting out of the Broncos backfield. And the last guy that I'm sitting, it's Rachaad White. He had a huge game last week. That was because Bucky Irving was dealing with his injury. Against the Chargers, a good run defense, even if he is the lead back yet again, I'm not trusting him. He's a guy that I'm sitting in all my lineups despite him having a good week last week. The wide receivers are always tough. There's always guys that are going to come out of nowhere and surprise you. But wide receivers, I'm definitely starting Courtland Sutton. He's been a top 10 wide receiver in fantasy this year, and against Indianapolis, I don't know why that would stop. He's a guy that I really do love. Same thing with Devonta Smith. I know I just said I'm not touching Jalen Hurts, but Devonta Smith found the end zone last week. He's a machine with the ball when he gets it, and I think he's going to take advantage of maybe a little bit of tension between Jalen Hurts and A.J. Brown this week. I'm starting Devonta Smith against Pittsburgh. Jacoby Myers is another guy without the greatest quarterback situation that I'm starting against maybe one of the worst secondaries in the NFL, maybe the worst secondary in the NFL in Atlanta. I know you have your questions about Desmond Ridder, but he should be able to get the ball to Jacoby Myers this week. I'm not worried about that. And there still is the potential that Aiden O'Connell comes out and plays. That would be huge for a Jacoby Myers fantasy performance. I'm also starting Adam Thielen this week versus Dallas, right? That is a good matchup for wide receivers. We just saw what Jamar Chase did against them. I'm not saying Adam Thielen is Jamar Chase, but he's been at or around 100 yards the last couple weeks. He's been awesome for Bryce Young. He's a guy that kind of has become the go-to target, at least the most reliable target. We've seen Xavier Legette struggle with a couple of drops this season. I'm starting Adam Thielen. And the last receiver I'm starting, it's Marvin Harrison Jr. He's had his fair share of ups and downs. But this is a game that I feel like he's getting into the end zone against the Patriots. Like I said, I'm putting all my stock of Arizona offense in, and I think Marvin Harrison finally has that game that we've been waiting on, aside from that Week 2 first quarter, where he scored 2 touchdowns. Wide receivers that I'm sitting Brian Thomas Jr. this week versus the Jets. He had a 40% target share last week. That is not sustainable. I just don't think that it's going to be the same way, and especially with how limited that Jaguars offense is, he's a guy that I'm a little more hesitant to sit. He's had a couple of bad weeks with Mac Jones. Last week was a good one, but again, 40% target share is kind of crazy, and he's not going to get that against a much better secondary than the Titans in the New York Jets. Tank Dell is another guy that I'm sitting. He's been so disappointing this season versus Minnesota, a very strong defense. This is Nico Collins' team. This is Joe Mixon's team. Tank Dell just doesn't really have a spot to be that elite wide receiver too that we saw him be last season. I don't think he's got it this week. Tank Dell is on my bench. Another guy that I'm sitting, Michael Pittman this week. Again, a very tough defense. He's going to draw a lot of those matchups against Pat Surtain. That is not a good look for him. He's not going to win those. I'm sitting Michael Pittman this week. I'm also sitting Xavier Worthy. I know we saw Jerry Jeudy go off against Cleveland, but this is a Kansas City team that doesn't really do those explosive plays that much. They're going to try and get those screen games going with him, and he'll touch the ball a bunch, but I just don't think he's going to have a huge game the way that some of these other receivers have had against Cleveland. And finally, the last guy I'm sitting is Jalen McMillan. He's a guy that went off last week for 2 touchdowns. He's really established himself as that wide receiver, too. But again, against a stout defense in the Los Angeles Chargers, I just don't see a way that he repeats his performance. That one feels like much more of an outlier to me than anything else that we've seen this season out of him, and I don't really trust that offense this week. And finally, the tight ends. 5 tight ends that I am starting. Zach Ertz is in my lineup. He has been kind of that number 2 option for Washington, and Jaden Daniels catches the touchdown last time out, has a pretty big game, really rules that middle of the field area. He's a guy that's a safety valve for Jaden Daniels when he rolls out of the pocket that I think is going to have a huge day against the Saints. Kind of along the same lines, I think Evan Ingram will have a big day as well. Again, it's going to be between him and Brian Thomas Jr., and I think we get an Evan Ingram game this week. We get a lot of targets to the tight ends with these backup quarterbacks. Mac Jones, I know he's a bit more established, but he's a guy that I don't really trust that much, and I think Evan Ingram on the underneath routes could have a huge day. Jonnu Smith, I'm starting. This one doesn't need a lot of explanation. He's been one of the best tight ends in football over the last couple weeks, and if you're even considering sitting him, you're doing something wrong as a fantasy manager. Put him in regardless of the matchup. One guy that I do like this week is Mike Gesicki taking on the Tennessee Titans. He's had an up and down season. He has games where he doesn't catch the ball, and that's the risk you're going to take, but he also has games where he scores 2 touchdowns. And in an offense like Cincinnati, I feel like he's going to have a huge day against Tennessee. They're going to have their hands full with the wide receivers on the outside. I don't think the linebackers are good enough to deal with Mike Gesicki this week. And TJ Hawkinson versus the Bears, I'm also starting. TJ Hawkinson has yet to have that breakout performance since coming back. He's been good, and I think he's working his way more and more into the offense. We saw Sam Darnold have a huge game last time out. I think this is a game where he relies on the tight end spot just a little bit more. In that same game, tight ends that I am sitting, Cole Kmet. I'm not starting Cole Kmet this week against Minnesota. Again, that defense is just too good. They're going to have a lot of pressure on Caleb Williams, and I don't think Cole Kmet is a guy that he relies on that much in that situation. I'm also sitting Mark Andrews. The Giants' defense, as bad as it's been, has been really good against tight ends. One of the best in all of the NFL. I'm sitting both him and Isaiah Likely. If he's a guy you're thinking about starting, I'm sitting both of them this week against the Giants. I'm also sitting Jake Ferguson. He was a guy that I thought was going to have a huge week last week. He ended up doing just about nothing against the Cincinnati Bengals. I don't think there's much in the cards for him this week against the Carolina Panthers either, although that is a matchup to think about if you truly are a little bit desperate there. I'm also sitting Dalton Schultz against Minnesota. Again, these last two are matchup based. Dalton Schultz doesn't get enough targets. If Tank Dell isn't getting enough targets, Dalton Schultz is even lower on the pecking order. And the last person that I'm sitting, it's Pat Freiermuth. He's had a good couple of games here for the Steelers. Him and Russell Wilson are building up a connection, but against Philadelphia, the best defense in all of football, I just don't see it happening this week. This is going to be a tough slate for a lot of these guys. Good luck in your fantasy football playoffs round 1. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we turn our attention to the actual playoff standings. The NFL has a bunch of scenarios that has a couple teams being able to clinch this week where we stand, and a couple tiebreakers that could happen in a crowded race at the bottom of each conference. We'll be right back here on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back to Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today is Thursday, December 12th. If you were just tuning in, we just finished going over the fantasy football starts and sits for this weekend. It's going to be a crazy weekend in fantasy football. We're going to take a look at the actual standings in the NFL in this one, talk about some ways that teams could clinch. There are 3 teams with clinching scenarios either for the division or for the playoffs. We're also going to talk about how each scenario will play off as we get later on into the season, as we can look ahead with just 4 matchups left, what the tiebreakers potentially are as we get into a wild card race in especially the AFC. But before we get into all of that, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Or if you are on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. If you do either of those 2 things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comments. Throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate everybody so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Thursday, December 12th. But like I was saying, we're going to get into some NFL playoff scenarios here. First of all, dealing with the ones that could clinch this week. There are 3 teams that could clinch the playoffs this week. There are 2 teams that could clinch their divisions this week. The 2 teams in the NFC that can clinch a playoff spot this week are the Vikings and the Packers. 2 and 3 in the NFC North. These 2 teams have a real shot of making it. They got pretty easy scenarios, especially the Vikings. The Vikings, they're simply in with the win. In the scenario where they don't win, they also have ways in. If either the Rams lose tonight or the Seattle Seahawks lose on Sunday, they are also in. So there's lots of scenarios. We could even see the Vikings clinch tonight without playing a game. That's one to look out for as we pay attention with more playoff implications in this game tonight. The Packers can clinch. It's a little bit tougher for them to clinch this week, but they can still find a way. If they win, if the Falcons lose, and most importantly, if there's a tie on tonight's game, they will get in. So it doesn't seem like the Packers are getting in tonight, but they are on the cusp, and if they win, they're probably going to find a very easy scenario to get in next week. Now, the other team that can get in is on the AFC side. It's the Houston Texans. If they win and the Indianapolis Colts lose, not only do they get in, but they clinch their division. As we stand right now, there are only 4 teams that have a playoff spot clinched, that being the top 2 seeds in each conference. The Chiefs and the Bills, who have both locked up their divisions at 1 and 2. The Lions at 12 and 1 have the top of that division, at the top of the NFC. They have not clinched that division yet because the Vikings just 1 game behind them. The Eagles have also clinched. They have not clinched their division yet, but they can this week. They can clinch their division if they win their game against the Steelers and the Washington Commanders lose on the road to the Saints. Not sure if that's going to happen, but that's all the playoff clinching scenarios. As we go further down the order, I'm going to start in the NFC here because surprisingly, it's actually the easier one to figure out. Right now, in the wild card spot, we have the Vikings at 11 and 2, pretty safe. Packers at 9 and 4, I'd also say pretty safe, but they're still on the outside looking in a little bit. And the Commanders at 8 and 5, and that's the one that we're going to target a little bit. In the hunt, you have the Rams at 7 and 6, which is why this game tonight is so important. First of all, if they end up losing, it gives Washington a huge leg up. It can give them a 2-game lead if they find a way to win this week in New Orleans, a game that they probably should win. The Rams also would then fall potentially 2 games behind in the division, but more importantly, the Rams and the 49ers would be tied at 7 and 7, and we'll just say, just to play with it, that the Seahawks lose this week, taking on Green Bay. In that case, you have a Seahawks team at 8 and 6, or Rams, 49ers, both at 7 and 7, and potentially the Cardinals at 7 and 7 if they're able to take care of business against the Patriots. So that is all three of those teams within 1 game of the Seahawks. They play the Seahawks. The Rams do. So do the Rams play the Seahawks. That's the last division game that they have to play outside of the one more that the Seahawks play. Or hold on, the Seahawks just play one more division game. That is Week 18 against the Rams. That one could be for the playoffs if all these scenarios head out. Right now, I think the Rams are the team that has the best chance of getting in outside of a division, right? If they're able to win this game tonight, they're going to put a lot of pressure on the Washington Commanders. You look at the Rams' schedule coming up. After the San Francisco game, it's not that hard. They finish off with the Jets on the road, and then they finish off the season at home with 2 division games, which is always tough. But it's at home, hosting the Arizona Cardinals and the Seattle Seahawks. That game is going to be huge in Week 18, potentially the Sunday night game that they always ended on. The Commanders have a pretty interesting schedule. It's not that hard. It's not that easy. They have the Saints, probably a win. The Eagles, most likely a loss. That one would be for the division if the Eagles win that one. The Atlanta Falcons is an interesting one. I don't know if they're going to be really good or really bad in that one, and they end the season at Dallas. Divisional matchup, you never know what's going to happen. So when you take a look at some of these schedules, I think the Rams probably have the easiest one. Now, the Seahawks have the hardest one when you break it down. They have Green Bay, playoff team, Minnesota, playoff team, Chicago, not a playoff team, but still a team that could give you a little bit of trouble. That one's their easiest. And then a division game on the road taking on the Rams in Week 18. That is a tough schedule. The Cardinals, they have the Patriots. They have the Carolina Panthers. Then they finish with 2 division games with the Rams and the 49ers. And the 49ers, they obviously have the Rams this week. They have Miami on the road. Then they have Detroit. And then they finish off the season at Arizona. That's probably the hardest schedule for the teams that still have a shot at the playoffs here. So I'm looking at potentially a Rams finding their way in, and the Bucs, I think, hold on to that division in the NFC South. Seahawks, I think they actually end up missing the playoffs. I think the Rams will take their spot. I think there's still a shot for them because currently, if there was no divisions, they'd be tied with the Commanders at 8-5. But I think it's going to be a lot tougher because that schedule is probably the hardest one in the NFC as far as contenders go down the stretch. Now, the AFC is really, really interesting, right? It looks pretty set, but you have at the bottom all 3 wildcard teams at 8-5. You have the Colts and the Dolphins, who are at 6-7 right now. And if you play out the schedule, if every single one of those teams, the Chargers, the Broncos, the Ravens, all of them, and the Texans, if they all go 9-8 this season, which is very possible with the schedules that they have, the Dolphins would get the first tiebreaker of those 9-8 teams, and then it would go to the Colts. So if all of them went into 9-8, you'd have the Dolphins at the 6th seed and the Colts at the 7th seed. Now, do I think that's going to happen? Probably not. I think the Chargers have a pretty easy schedule outside of Tampa Bay and Denver. They finish off the season with the Patriots and the Raiders. If they're able to win those 2 games down the stretch, they get to 10 wins, and 10 wins qualifies you for the playoffs most likely. A huge game this week between the Colts and the Broncos. That's going to tell us a lot about where we stand as far as the playoff race. If the Colts find a way to win this one, that would set them up nicely. The Broncos have a tough schedule. They have the Colts, the Chargers, the Bengals, and the Chiefs. That is the toughest schedule in the AFC remaining. The Bengals still in it. They can find a way to get to 9-8 if they win out. Tennessee, they could win that game. The Browns, they could win that game. Denver potentially could win that game, and then they finish it on the road against Pittsburgh, and you never know what's going to happen in divisional games. They still have a shot at out if they can win out. Dolphins, again, have all the tiebreakers. They have a tough schedule, though. Houston this week, San Francisco next week, then they finish it on the road at Cleveland and at New York, taking on the Jets. So it's not necessarily an easy schedule, but it is one where we could find a way in. My money is, I think the Colts find a way in over the Broncos there, and everything else stands pat. But the AFC wildcard race, for one that seems so far away with the way that the schedules are lining up, it could get pretty intense down the stretch here with 3 teams all potentially finding a way in. But let me know what you think. Who do you think is going to end up taking the playoff race? Who's getting in those wild card spots? I'd love to hear your thoughts. We're going to take a quick break here. When we come back, we finish off our show talking all about the NBA Cup. The semifinals are set. We'll talk about everything that happened last night with Trae Young going off yet again. We have our matchup set. We'll talk about that coming up next here on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. Welcome back to Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today is Thursday, December 12th. If you were just tuning in, we just finished going over the playoff standings as we stand heading into Week 15 in the NFL. In this segment, we turn our attention to the NBA. The NBA Cup semifinals have officially been set. We have the Bucks taking on the Hawks and the Thunder taking on the Rockets. But before we get into any more in-depth there, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Or if you are on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. If you do either of those two things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comments. Throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate everybody so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Thursday, December 12th. But like I was saying, we are going to get into the NBA Cup action, the second ever NBA Cup. The semifinals are now set after a fun quarterfinal round, especially the games last night. We saw the Hawks head into New York, head into Madison Square Garden, and Trae Young did his thing. Trae Young, just incredible at Madison Square Garden. He finishes the game with another double-double, 11 assists on not the greatest shooting, finishes with 22 points, but he hits clutch shots down the stretch, keeps them in it after they fell down early in that game. He continues to egg on that crowd. He loves playing at MSG. It's something that is super fun to see when you watch a guy play the villain like that. They find a way to win that game. The Hawks are an enigma to me, honestly. They're playing really good basketball right now. They've been one of the hottest teams in all of basketball. But it just has not correlated to consistency, right? They just don't have the shooting nights that they expect all the time. They out-efforted the Knicks in this one, which is something you don't see that often. But they move on to the next round, taking on the Bucks, a hobbled Bucks team that didn't look their best against a Magic team that didn't have their two best players. And that's something that I think they could take advantage of in that Eastern Conference semifinals, right? You have a Bucks team that doesn't play the greatest defense, and I think this Hawks team is built kind of similarly to that Magic squad. They have a little bit better shooting, and Trae Young's offense is something to keep your eye on. But their defense is nothing to scoff at either, right? They held the Knicks to 100 points. They've held the Cavs to 100 points. This is a team that can play really, really good defense at times with their length, especially on the perimeter. Now, I'm not sure if they can really handle Giannis, but that's something to be seen. But this is a Hawks team that's dangerous and I think could give the Bucks a really good game. In fact, I think they might even win that. We'll have to see when it comes to it next week. But the other game was the big story last night in the NBA. The Warriors took on the Rockets, and there was controversy at the end. There was a controversial foul call that sent the Rockets to the free throw line, where we saw Jalen Green hit both of those free throws. Instead of a Golden State victory there, they had a 1-point victory go to the Houston Rockets. The Rockets at 17-8 now are near the top of the Western Conference as we stand. They have been incredibly impressive all season long. Currently at second in that Western Conference, only 2.5 games back of the Thunder. The Golden State Warriors, that was a game that they thought they were going to have, right? This is a Warriors team that's been playing a lot better than I thought they would this season, but a 1-point victory, 91-90, a very low-scoring effort between these teams. When you take a look at the shooting percentages, it was just good defense all around. Now, the Rockets did just shoot 22% from three-point land, which is not exactly what you expect out of them, but this is a typical Rockets-Warriors game, at least of this season. Again, that controversial foul that was called that sent Jalen Green to the line, I don't know if it really was a foul. It was I wouldn't have called that, honestly. Now, I'm not the ref in that situation, but in a late game scenario where you're letting the clock wind down, right? You have a loose ball on the ground, players diving forward, and sure, they went for it late, but Jalen Green was trying to call a timeout there, get the ball back. The ball was going loose. There's no doubt about it. Player dived on there at the end. I don't know if it really was a foul. It was an effort play. I don't know if you really just let him go, but a timeout, maybe you give it to him. A foul, I don't know about that. I think that was a bad way to end what was a really, really well-played game between two teams that have already played 3 times this season. The Golden State Warriors won the other 2 matchups. This is going to be a fun season for the. This is going to be a fun matchup later on if they do meet in the playoffs, which is entirely possible. But now you set up a game between the Rockets and the Thunder, the top 2 teams in the Western Conference, for a chance to go and be that Western Conference representative in the NBA Cup, right? That is going to be super fun to watch. You have 2 teams that defensively have been some of the best in all of basketball, right? We saw the Rockets escape with a 3-point victory last time they played the Thunder, 119-116. The Thunder won the first game that they played. Now they're going to meet up again next week, or in a couple of days, to play for that NBA, for the finals in that NBA Cup. And this is going to be this is probably the best matchup out of the West. You have a Bucks team and a Hawks team in the East, but this is probably for the champion of the NBA Cup. I think both of these teams are just undeniably better. Now, I think it's going to come down to what kind of shooting night you get out of the Rockets, right? You saw them last time that they matched up when the Rockets were able to get that win. You saw them shoot 40% from the field, and they forced a lot of turnovers, right? They out-rebounded them, and they just played better basketball, really. This is going to be a fun one. Game 3 of the series. I think the Thunder find a way to win this one. I think they're getting a little bit more healthy. I think the way that Shea is playing is insane. And I don't think, for as good as the Rockets are, I don't think they stand much of a chance. We would set up a Thunder versus Hawks finals, which crazy to think the Hawks are in the finals of anything this season. But I think the Thunder, this is their year to win the cup. I'm curious to see how the reaction is going to be to that. I think the Oklahoma City Thunder are the best team in basketball right now, but we will see if it gets the same reaction that the Lakers winning it last year got. But let me know what you think. What do you think of the NBA Cup games last time out? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thank you, everybody, so much for tuning in to today's episode of Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I have been your host, Jeremy Lapidus. We will be back same time, same place tomorrow, breaking down the Thursday night football game that so far has been a punt fest. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about picks for this weekend and much more. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't